Hello there and welcome again to our program on business communications. And our program on business communications involves quite a lot of subjects. We've touched on many subjects, including listening, asking questions and giving feedback in the communication process. And we've also looked at the different behavioural styles that we have as communicators. So at this stage of the program, I do feel that you are starting to really know more about yourself, and perhaps you are better equipped now to realize your limitations and also know where you should be looking to improving with regard to your communication skills. Communications, or the big C as we call it, certainly is a necessary skill for up-and-coming young managers or existing managers, CEOs, anybody indeed who is in business and who wants to make business a success. So let's take a look now at one of the aspects of communication, and this is termed conflict resolution. You really do need to be able to know how to communicate when conflict arises. Not only do you need to know how to solve the problems, which is another part of the skills area that you require, but also you do need to know how to handle the situations. What are the words you say? What are the things you convey in your communication when conflict arises? Let's just take a look at it right now. It's quite true to say that people disagree on things. You are never ever going to find a workplace or a situation where everybody totally agrees on all aspects of everything. So we normally do experience conflict every day in our lives, every day indeed in our personal lives, and every day in our business lives as well. We will in some ways experience varying forms of conflict. Now, this interaction of ideas and opinions, which is a very nice way of describing conflict, this interaction sparks new ideas, actually, and sometimes it can lead to better solutions and much more progressive plans of action. Let's not view conflict as a negative thing, as a destructive thing in business or at home. Conflict indeed can be seen as a very constructive thing or a positive way of doing things or lead to positive results. But sometimes we might find that there are differences of opinions between parties where too much emotional commitment comes about, and sometimes the resulting conflict can be quite damaging. Let's face reality, this does happen. Conflict, we want to make it positive and constructive, of course. However, there are times when conflict does damage. Conflict does create problems and negative results. But anyway, let's move forward as we approach this subject of conflict. What is conflict, as I did ask you before? A potential byproduct of ineffective feedback. This is very true indeed. Sometimes, or a lot of the time, conflict comes about because the feedback has been ineffective. It has been inappropriate. It hasn't existed, perhaps. So feedback, as you can see, is a very crucial part, has a very critical role to play in whether conflict will come about. That's why it's important to enhance your skills on giving and providing feedback, as we have done in the previous session. So here we see two little figures where there appears to be conflict. Conflict, quite openly and honestly, conflict hurts productivity. Conflict hurts quality. When people have conflict going on around them in the business sense, it disrupts all their thinking processes. It really affects the way that people will continue on the job. You probably find that when there's conflict, people tend to want to get up and walk out. They don't want to be around the situation. And therefore, productivity is affected. If you have people arguing on the factory floor, for example, people will not produce because they're not happy. So therefore, bottom line results are less. You do suffer in terms of your productivity and your profitability as well, long term. Conflict can impair the quality as well of your product, the quality of what people are trying to give. They will not be paying attention because their mind is away, lost and tied up with the emotions that come with conflict. Therefore, quality suffers. Things are not done as well as they should be. People are preoccupied with the hurt that comes with conflict, with all the disruption that comes with the conflict. We can also see that conflict hurts service. In the service industry, if your customer service team, your customer care call center, if your staff are in conflict, that is ultimately going to affect the way that they service the caller. And that's just one example. You can see numerous examples in the service industry where conflict can create a very bad service for the customer from the staff. It hurts morale as well. Morale being the wonderful feeling we should all have when we're in the workplace that motivates us and inspires us to reach our goals. The morale is definitely affected in any organization where there is serious conflict. But sometimes it doesn't have to be serious conflict as well. It could be minor conflict that is quite a niggling conflict that is eating away at people over long term. And this can affect the attitudes and the behaviors and the feeling of belonging of people in an organization. And conflict ultimately will hurt working relations, working relationships, perhaps between yourself and your team, perhaps between your 5 team members and the other 5 team members of the other team, etc. So ultimately, conflict is something we really don't want to have around. It's something that we have to nip in the bud, that we have to really know how to handle, and we have to know how to communicate through these conflict concerns, conflict situations that arise. Have you had much experience with dealing with conflict? Are you very capable when it comes to dealing with conflict? What's your track record? Are you confident that you can handle conflict in a lot of situations? Or depending on the nature or your behavior as a communicator, how do you approach somebody in a conflict situation and try and resolve it? We're going to take a very close look at conflict because it is definitely an integral part of the communication process. And it's something that if you find you are having limitations or you find you need to improve upon, then most certainly please pay attention to this particular session. No matter what the circumstances, do not look at conflict, by the way, as a win or lose situation. You really have to adopt the approach, and your focus should be on what is best for everyone. This is the way you should frame your thinking when it comes to conflict. Not who's going to win, who's going to lose. It's not a game, it's not a sport. It's really not meant to be that way. It's not somebody competing against somebody else. When you see conflict, your focus, as I said, should be on trying to find out what's best for everyone concerned and see how that can come about. It may be easier said than done, right? However, your experience and perhaps picking up on some of the guidelines here will be able to help you along the pathway to resolving conflict. Let's take a look at the nature of conflict. Conflict, as I said, sometimes can be very, very damaging and destroying, but it does not necessarily need to be destroying. Open communication without emotional kinds of explosions is the key method for resolving any conflict. Try to remember that when you are open with your communications and you are calm and you are fair and you are balanced in the way that you approach things, then this is really going to help you when you try to go about resolving the conflict that's come about. There are 3 components, we can say, that exist with conflict, or 3 different ways of having conflict. You can have 2 or more people who are involved where there is a difference of opinions, etc. So you've got 2 people involved or more. 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100. You could have lots of people involved in conflict. Conflict also cannot not necessarily be about people being involved, but differences of perceptions of ideas may be the source of the conflict. The different beliefs and goals may be what the conflict is. And also there may be a third kind where opposing sides see their way as the only way to do something. So conflict can emerge and show itself in several ways, as we have just seen here. There are several sources of conflict, as we have talked about, and I'll just go through them to explain to you a little bit more, and so we get a clear understanding of what conflict really is. Here there may be, depending on the level of responsibility or job role that you have, sometimes things are not really clear, and the responsibilities that you have are not really written down very clearly, so it's quite ambiguous as to your responsibility level. This does happen in organizations. I'm not sure about your organization, but quite often when conflict arises inside a department or an organization, this could be one of the sources of that conflict. And therefore, it pays to try to ensure that clear job descriptions and organization charts are made so as they can help prevent these sorts of conflicts arising. In HR departments, it's important that responsibility levels and job descriptions are reviewed from time to time so that no conflict does exist and that this is not a source for conflict. So if you find that you are in conflict over some things, it may be that you're not really clear of what you should be doing in your role. It's perhaps a bit ambiguous and you're not fully understanding the level of responsibility that is yours. This is something that you can help prevent in your position as a manager with your staff. Try to ensure that there are clear job roles and descriptions for them and that they know where they fit in the organization. When you've done that, and that's communicated to them, then that lessens possible conflict in the future. Sometimes there are limited resources in departments as well to perform certain tasks, and therefore conflict will arise. Sometimes departments need to share what they have with other departments and maybe maximize on those resources as best they can. So limited resources do in some ways cause a bit of conflict. Conflict of interest exists too, where each individual in an organization needs to know his own goals and efforts fit with the organization's. Individuals may conflict with their own targets in what they want to do in their careers, and so this causes conflict. For example, am I working in the right company? Is this really where I want to be? So, do individuals really want to be where they are working? Is that their ultimate aim in their career path? So you have conflicts of interest that come up. These are some of the sources that cause conflict as we go briefly through them. Sometimes barriers in communication cause conflict as well. As we've touched on this before, different perceptions, different thinking about things, different views on things, the language, style differences, power and status barriers, sometimes these cause conflict. And therefore, one of the solutions to this is to bring about some communication training with your staff to ensure that people understand what barriers are and how to eliminate them. Let's take a look at interdependency. Now more than ever, we are finding that our ability to achieve targets and objectives depends on the cooperation and assistance of others, so we are dependent upon them. Now, having said that, that's good to be able to cooperate with other people, but trying to cooperate across departments laterally in an organization sometimes increases conflict. People don't understand each other that well and the communication is not clear. So here, this is another source of conflict that can arise in organizations. Maybe this happens where you are right now. Perhaps you have an issue and between department and department who need each other to cooperate and achieve goals, there is some conflict. So how do you approach that? We're going to look at that a little bit later. Again, there is more people interaction now in the workplace. Years and years and years ago, people just came to work, did their job and went home. But that doesn't exist anymore. Now people are required to interact. And the more interaction there is, the more potential there is for conflict. You know that as well as I. So the trend towards increasing levels of participation and teamwork indicates a much higher possibility of conflict and therefore a greater need for conflict resolution skills. So as you build your teams, remember you're going to have to build your ability to resolve conflict that's going to raise its head amongst your teams ultimately. Competition. For rewards such as promotions and recognition, conflict is natural. Sometimes there's conflict. Some people feel that somebody was rewarded unfairly for something when they should have been rewarded. So this is a very difficult area. And if someone, for example, is promoted over somebody else, then conflict will appear. So this is a natural thing. This exists. So be ready for it. Be prepared to understand all of these sources of conflict, and we will try to equip you as to how to resolve them. So understanding conflict, understanding that people cause conflict, job descriptions can cause conflict, competition for something can cause conflict, communication barriers can cause conflict, having to rely on other departments to work with them can cause conflict. The fact that you don't have enough resources can cause conflict. And perhaps you're working with people who have very strong opinions. These things can all cause conflict. So conflict appears in change. It could appear in a budget cutback, a new project, or a change of manager. So whenever there is change, there also can be conflict that may come up as well. Conflict can appear at the point where members are becoming aware of the problem and the tension. There are phases in the conflict process. First, it appears, and then we perceive the conflict when we are aware of the problems and the tension. Next, we feel the conflict. We feel the frustrations. They begin to show themselves, and they begin to be defined as people build up their emotions and their reactions to them. And lastly, in the 4 phases of conflict, opposing parties try to frustrate one another, and conflict is very obvious at this point. So there are the different 4 phases of conflict, how we can actually recognize conflict. So let's take a closer look at how we might be able to manage the conflict that exists. There are various strategies for managing conflict, and any strategy that you embark on is going to require that you have very good communication skills, very good ability to be able to work through the conflict. Here we're going to take our focus to collaboration. This is one strategy, one way of dealing with conflict. And as you probably well understand, it does require a high level of cooperation, and it does also require a high level of assertiveness. Assertiveness meaning that you are firm, you communicate what you believe and what you strongly think should be the pathway to follow, and that is communication ability. Collaboration, because it is quite involved, it takes time and it takes effort. And in trying to collaborate and use the collaboration strategy, you need to be able to probe for the real needs. You need to be quite creative in looking for solutions, in trying to problem solve. And you are actually going to be looking for long-lasting solutions as well. And this is why it does take quite a bit of time to do this. But through open communication, it will take time and it is efficient. Collaboration is a very efficient way of dealing with and managing conflict. There are three components that we need to talk about when we look at collaboration, and I think it's important to go through them in some detail with you. There is the understanding and respecting part of collaboration. This is highly important if you really want to look for long-lasting benefit and long-term results. It assumes that there is a level of equality for all parties involved. It doesn't mean that one person is better than the other, or one person is more superior than the other, or superior to the other. So in collaboration, trying to understand and respect each other is very, very important. And here, the goals and objectives of each person should be presented equally, regardless of the positions, regardless of who is in the higher or more senior position or the lower or more junior position. When you have this level of equality, then you have participation of all parties equally. And each member tries to stay focused on the organisation's goals rather than on their individual objectives. In that way, you're bringing a sense of unity to the process. So collaboration requires a high deal of understanding and respecting of each other, respecting of each person who is involved in the conflict. Assertiveness, as we mentioned briefly previously, assertiveness is a skill that you are going to have to be able to display if you wish collaboration to succeed. And anybody who is involved in conflict really wants to stand up for what they believe in and what they say and for their view. That's being assertive. However, it's the way that the assertiveness is communicated that is very, very important indeed. Each person must feel safe when they have their turn to express their views and opinions. And each position needs to be expressed very powerfully as possible. So the commitment and the assertion of those ideas is really felt and understood. People often confuse assertiveness, however, with aggression. Do you confuse it? Do you think assertiveness is being aggressive? I know many people who do. But assertiveness certainly is very, very different. And as a manager, assertiveness is a communication skill that you need to hone and you need to practice up to be able to express yourself very powerfully and positively. Aggression is assertiveness, but without regard for the needs of the other person. That's the difference. Assertiveness thinks of the other person. Aggression does not really consider the other person at all. They only consider them as a losing situation. For example, if you want to be assertive, you would say, "Here's my position, what's yours?" If you wanted to be aggressive, you would say, "Here's my position, take it or leave it." There is a difference. Assertive communication is very different to aggressive communication. So, if you wish collaboration to succeed and succeed very well, then you need to hone your assertive communication skills. Further on in the process of resolving conflict, it's important in the collaboration part that you try to problem solve and be very creative in your problem solving, because these can help to find solutions that reach a win for each person. You have win-win, so to speak. And it is important to focus on the problem and then the specific solutions that come as a result of focusing on that problem. Spend time with your colleagues, identifying as many possible solutions as you can before proceeding with an evaluation. And as I mentioned before, don't lay blame. A blame culture is not a positive way of dealing with conflict. So, in the conflict resolution process of things, you are going to have to be able to communicate your way through when you're dealing with different people, trying to gain understanding and respect amongst them, trying to assert yourself and have them assert themselves as well, and also being able to creatively problem solve, and in the process of collaboration, communicate strongly all along the way how things should be proceeding. This is where you will be leading the situation, and this is where your communication skills will be very effective indeed. Let's take a closer look at the details that surround confrontation and the strategy of resolving conflict through confrontation. Actually, the confrontation process allows you to get quite close to the root cause of the conflict in a very productive way, because you are actually trying to head-on look at the situation and trying to communicate to the other party what you really want to say. You are actually wanting to get their ideas, and you might say it this way: let's exchange ideas pleasantly and comfortably. I will try to hear you and will take your opinion into account before I state mine. Then I want you to hear my opinions. Once we have exchanged our opinions, we will decide on the best option. So here we see this is not a contest for superiority. Here we're trying to explore in an equal way ways of getting people's views. So you are communicating to the other side exactly what you want and waiting for them to communicate back to you. So here you are using a strategy that is confronting the issue right head on. And through the words that you use in a confronting way and an indirect way, you are able to establish what the differences are. So there are different levels of confrontation, which start with understanding behavioral change. If you understand behavioral change, you are really going to be adept at resolving conflict. You need to be able to, first of all, demonstrate your sincere desire to understand the person's feelings and needs. And here you reflect, in a way, the feelings that you hear the person expressing. You give them a chance to share their feelings, and you can say things back to them that will help them try to resolve the situation. Reflection is what we call. And here you demonstrate very sincerely the data, the information, and build rapport with that person by reflecting back to them with your personal expressions. For example, you might say, I understand that you feel upset at the changes because you were wanting to take on this role. I understand that you think that I haven't heard your inquiries about the new job because I haven't paid much attention to you. I understand that you feel unappreciated because you are not invited to the weekly staff meetings. Here you are demonstrating your sincere desire to understand them. And it's very important to use these kinds of phrases. Here you are reflecting your desire to understand. Using these soft words, particularly in English, are a way to starting the conflict resolution process. And this is a very effective way of communicating to your subordinates, particularly when you have serious issues at hand. So remember these as guidelines. I understand that you feel. I understand that you think, whatever. And then we have an example here at the bottom. When you approach somebody this way and communicate this way, they do tend to warm and open up to you, and they do feel your sincerity by using these words. Of course, your tone of voice will be very necessary, and the way you express yourself is very, very important as well. Here, you might find that the person will say things back to you to really clarify the situation and their feelings. Next up, in the different parts of confrontation and resolving conflict, there is the I statement. I meaning me, I. With I statements, you reveal your feelings, asserting your own needs and objectives in a very non-judgmental way. Here, when you use the I statement, you want the other person to understand your feelings and your reasons. And a general way of opening this up and using the I statement is in the following example. You could begin and open up by saying, I feel angry when you ignore the safety rules because you and others may get hurt. I feel such and such when you such and such because of something. So this is a standard approach to using the I statement. And here you are really revealing your feelings. You are confronting the issue. And you are using your communication skills through these words to be able to confront it in a very appropriate manner and positive way. I feel that you really don't understand me and that you get angry with me even when I'm just 5 minutes late for a meeting. These things, when you use I feel that, it really is a very soft way of opening up and revealing how you feel about a situation, and people don't get defensive. We then move to the diplomatic disagreement stage of confrontation, when we're trying to deal with different conflicts. In this stage of the process, you try to achieve understanding in a gentle and tactful manner as well. You want the other person to understand your reasoning, and you try to understand his. That's quite simple. You want them to know that you value the relationship as well, and this is important. So the format for this kind of discussion includes reflection. It also includes the I statement that we've just gone through. So let's take a look at some examples how you might be able to resolve conflict using these types of words when you communicate. So the format for diplomatic disagreement is where that you would use reflection and you would use the I statement. Next, we look at gentle confrontation. In gentle confrontation, you try to cause a change in the behavior and build the relationship at the same time. And this does require you to have very strong communication skills and understanding of behavioral styles. You want to suggest a change in a very tactful way, and the format also includes reflection and an indication that the other person is valued. An I statement and indication of consequences would also follow. We have an example here where you would say, for example, let's look at this. You think the accounting department should pay our vendors immediately. I appreciate your position and understand that it helps you negotiate better prices. But I feel frustrated, however, because I am trying to manage our cash flow as well as our profits. If you continue to pressure the accounting department, it will make it much more difficult for me to manage the cash flow and the investments. That could result in vendors going unpaid and a reduction in profits, which could impact our profit sharing. So here you have made several statements, beginning with you think to the other person. I appreciate your position, but I feel frustrated. If you continue, then so-and-so will happen. It will cause certain effects. So these are basic guidelines and some examples that you can possibly use when you're looking at how you communicate and try to solve and resolve conflict that exists within your department or organization. And finally, we come to firm confrontation. We've looked at various levels of confrontation. We have looked at reflection. We have looked at the I statement. We've looked at diplomatic disagreement, and we've looked at gentle confrontation. And now we are looking at firm confrontation. In firm confrontation, you try to clear up disagreements and cause a definite change in behaviour. The change is your primary objective, and there is an added statement in this format. And the added statement is that I would appreciate it in the future if you would such and such. For example, in the future I would appreciate it if you would come to me for any special early payment requests. So here this is confrontation, but it is a little firmer than the previous confrontation styles that we have looked at. So use these guidelines in your communication process. They can be very valuable. They can assist you to know how to format and how to structure the way that you go through the conflict resolution communication. Hopefully you'll be able to resolve conflict in a very positive way. Languages do vary. We are looking here at the English language, of course, and perhaps you might like to be able to transfer that to your own language as you go through the conflict resolution process. The main thing to remember here is considering the other person in conflict resolution always. Trying not to push too hard, but pushing gently so that everybody comes out with benefit at the end. So let's move on and summarize and look at some basic guidelines on confrontation. We've looked at collaboration, and now we're looking at confrontation. So for more productive confrontation processes, try to consider the timing. Is the person ready to listen? Is the person going to really listen to you at that time? About coming late, it is the worst time to discuss it while someone is signing in. So be careful when you actually do discuss these issues. The person already knows they're late, so wait for a positive thing to say and add how his lateness affects the overall perception of his performance. Don't sort of bail somebody up right when they're signing in. Do it at a different time. Do it when they're ready to listen. Because when they're signing in, their mind is somewhere else and they are perhaps feeling a little bit guilty. So timing is very important when you actually want to confront people and communicate what you want to say about the conflict. Also, focus on current specifics. That means Talk about what's happening now, not something that happened last week or last month. That's irrelevant now. You've got to catch things very current to the moment, and you have to really relate to what has happened in the very recent past, either yesterday or today, not too far ago. So, because people will not find it relevant, they'll say, well, why didn't you tell me then? Why didn't you talk to me about it then? So, focus on current specifics rather than things that have happened in the past. State your feelings. Here, when you really want to tell somebody how you feel, you're keeping the conversation very, very open. And when it comes to this simple example of coming late, somebody signing in late, just tell them, for example, when you come late to work, I feel really angry because the rest of us have to wait for you before we can start on the project. This is a better way of approaching the situation. Simply stating exactly what you feel. That person then will understand you very, very clearly. And you're not blaming the person. You're blaming the behavior. You're blaming what happens as a result of their behavior. This way is going to be much more successful by actually showing them the results of their lateness. So they may feel guilty and they may actually acknowledge that, yes, they are causing this situation and they want to solve it. As I have said, confrontation is a powerful strategy in resolving conflict. It does require a great deal of skill and a great deal of practice. But when applied, a number of conflicts can be resolved very productively. And also remember, people want you to be able to be sincere when you're talking about conflict and ways of resolving it. They want to know that the change is going to be in the best interest of them and you. It's important to remember that people only change, when it is in their best interest to do so. You cannot change anyone, but you can motivate them to change. And that is the key. Through the way that you speak to them, through the way that you conduct your strategies in resolving the conflict, you are going to be able to motivate that person to change. So this is where communication becomes of paramount importance. The techniques and the skills that you will be developing are going to really assist in this process. There are many strategies to avoid in the resolution of conflict. There is a very big not to do list. And I would like to take you through them one by one to enhance your knowledge of this subject. I'm sure by now that you are realizing how deeply important resolution of conflict is and how the way you communicate through it is the key to the success of that conflict resolution. So let's take a look here first up. Minimization. This simply means here we respond sometimes to a problem by discounting it, by not really taking it very, very seriously. We don't recognize that it is a serious thing. And sometimes we just respond with humor or sarcasm. Oh, you'll be able to get through it. You're a bright spark. You'll be able to manage that. And sometimes when we minimize the seriousness of that conflict, the other person actually feels undervalued. They feel that they are belittled. They don't feel that you actually took notice of what they were trying to say. And they will take your minimization of their issue as a personal attack. So the thing is that you must remember, when someone brings a problem to you, first of all, acknowledge it. Don't minimize it. They have gone to great pains or overcome a lot of obstacles to try to let you know something. So acknowledge it. This is one of the, remember the caress models. Caress model, acknowledge. So it's important that you don't discount what the problem is. An example of minimization. An engineer, he says, I'm afraid the O-ring might fail at low temperatures. Manager 1 says, that's not your problem. Worry about how we're going to meet our next deadline. Manager 2, in contrast to Manager 1, says, I appreciate your concern. What makes you think that? So you see here, Manager 1 has minimized the problem. More or less ignored it. Ignored the effort of the engineer to bring it to his attention. This is quite a clear example of minimization. Blame. This is something not to do. Sometimes blame can often be attached to the last person who touched a situation. And in reality, most problems are very, very complex to be totally caused by one person or one factor. So therefore, the focus shouldn't be on blaming one person. There are lots of contributing factors that go towards problems and making conflict. So therefore, the focus should be more on preventing future problems rather than placing blame. This is a very positive attitude to have in resolving conflict. So here we have an example where we have a salesperson who said, we didn't get the Smith account. Manager 1 says, what did you do wrong? Laying blame. Manager 2, in contrast, says, what could we have done better? The second manager, is not laying blame. So here you see the difference in communication. Communication is essential, as I keep emphasizing to you. So here, do not lay blame. Do not communicate blame. You'll find that the salesperson will be far more responsive with manager number 2. In what could we have done better? Another not to do on the list of things to avoid when confronting and resolving conflict, is what we call unloading. When people have worked together for a long time, there are often many, many injuries which have gone unmentioned. And when a larger problem sparks a conflict, all the past injuries or all the past problems come to mind. And sometimes, even though it might make the person unloading all their injuries or problems feel better, this is not a very productive solution, not a very productive strategy. So therefore, don't unload everything that ever happened to you in the world at one time when you are trying to resolve conflict or trying to understand the conflict process. The other person might say, you should have said this before when the problem occurred. This simply means that being timely is very important. Remember, try to tell people what's gone wrong when things have gone wrong. Don't hold them on and build a bank of problems that have gone wrong for the last 2 weeks or month and then suddenly unload them all at one time on a person. So this is your role, this is your responsibility to recognize and, of course, not unload a whole lot of baggage all at one time. You should have done it in the past. And actually the person is very, very correct. Examples of unloading. An employee arrives at work late. Manager 1 says, not only are you late, but last week there was an additional error in the report you submitted, and you never have turned in the Murphy proposal that was due over a month ago. Here you see lots of, we say, injuries or baggage from the past, things that have happened some time ago are now suddenly unloaded all in one sentence to the employee who arrives at work late. Manager number 2, in contrast, he says to the employee, is everything okay? I know you were only a few minutes late, but you normally seem so committed, and recently you've seemed to be distracted. Is there anything I can do? As you can see, this is a better way of talking to the employee who has come to work late, not unloading every problem they ever encountered or ever created, but being more empathic, being more problem-solving, being more positively oriented towards reaching a solution to conflict. Do you have examples in your experience of working in your company where you have a manager who has unloaded everything off at you at one time when you've only just done something differently? It's quite a common thing that does appear, and it leaves a very nasty sort of effect on people. It leaves a very bad feeling on the person who's been unloaded on. So try to remember that this is not a very positive way to deal with confronting people in times of conflict or times when things go wrong. We also come to touchy areas, sensitivities, let's say. Sensitivities that can sometimes cause us to communicate in the wrong way. So when we are trying to deal with these types of conflicts, as we work with people, we begin to understand their sensitivities more and more. And indeed, as a manager, you should be able to do this. You should be doing it all the time, getting to know your people. So hitting one of those touchy areas can actually escalate a conflict out of control. If there is a conflict in place and you touch on something that's a very sensitive issue, things can go haywire. Things can go so crazy that you wished you never actually opened the conversation. Sometimes it is also very difficult to regain what you have just lost. So, an example here to show you what we mean by hitting touchy areas or touching on sensitivities is when, for instance, an employee may miss a meeting. The co-worker number 1 says, "No wonder you were fired from your last job. Obviously you're incapable of managing your time." In contrast, co-worker 2 says, "I really needed your support in this morning's meeting. You know, I took a time management course that really seemed to help me get organized. Maybe you should take it next time it's offered." So here we see there is a difference. If you really push and go like a blowtorch on people's sensitivities, you will end up with a real deep argument. So be careful of sensitivities and sensitive issues. We also come to another no-no, and this is the use of manipulation when you are trying to resolve conflict. Using personal charm to get someone to do something that you want done without regard to the other person's needs or objectives. This is not really the way to proceed with dealing with conflict or trying to resolve it. And also manipulation comes up in many aspects of communication. Coercing people to do something, making them feel obliged to do something in order to receive a reward, etc. This also, as I've just mentioned now, involves withholding approvals for things to go ahead or withholding rewards in order to get the desired reaction. This is definitely not the way to proceed when you're trying to resolve conflict. An example of manipulation could be something like this, where a manager wants an employee to work overtime. And the first manager number 1, says, "If you work overtime tonight, I'll remember it when review time comes up." Aha, meaning he will favor you. Now that is manipulating. Manager number 2, in contrast, manager number 2 will say, "I am sorry to ask you at the last minute, But we have a crisis with the ABC project. If we don't get it finished tonight, the company may lose the whole project. Could you possibly work tonight? So here you can see that the manager number 2 is giving opportunity for the employee to respond. He's not manipulating the situation and forcing a situation or unduly coercing the employee to work. He's asking him, he is requesting permission in a positive way and a confronting way. So manipulation is definitely a no-no when it comes to resolving conflict. And we finally move to force. This is definitely something you do not want to proceed with when you're trying to resolve conflict. This is the I don't care what you want, do it my way now approach. If all you need is to get immediate action and response, well, this sort of thing works. It works through fear because people will just run and do something because they've been instructed and commanded to do something. If it's only used in a rare occasion, it is effective. Let's be real about it. And if you want something to be done immediately, then yeah, it can be effective, but it is demoralizing to the other person. You really do not wish to speak to people this way. It does not really acknowledge the value or the worth of that person. It actually puts them in a lower form. You actually look down upon that person by using force when you communicate this way. So this is definitely a no-no and a style or a communication way that you definitely need to avoid when you're trying to resolve conflict. Let's look at an example. A manager wants to change the work schedule. Manager 1, he says, from now on our hours are 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's his statement. Quite a forceful statement. Manager number 2, in contrast, he says it this way. His communication style is different. Studies show that the prime hours for our customers are 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. So we need to develop a system that will allow us to give the best possible service to our customers during those hours. Do you have any suggestions? You see the difference. Force is manager 1, and someone who is more or less seeking permission and being very collaborative is manager number 2 in trying to seek resolution to conflict. Here we're going to provide a bit of a summary in terms of conflict resolution behaviours. In the previous session, we have been working on conflict resolution and ways to communicate that to your teams or to your peers or to your bosses. And indeed, in this session, we are going to briefly go through the behaviours that exist and summarise how conflict can be resolved. As you understand conflict, there are different behaviours that we exhibit. And to summarise the behaviours, there are 5 basic behaviours which will help you resolve conflict in almost any situation that you encounter. We talked about the not to-do list of resolving conflict in the past session and things that you should be mindful of when you're trying to communicate with your various staff. Here we're going to look at the 5 basic behaviours that you should approach so that you can be assured that conflict is resolved in a very appropriate and professional manner. These basic behaviours will allow you to benefit from positive disagreement without having those disagreements escalate into out-of-control personality conflicts. And those out-of-control personality conflicts can be very damaging to the morale and the productivity of an organisation. I don't know if you have experienced in the time that you've been working in your position very serious conflicts between different people, but certainly it is not a very pleasant place to be. It is not very pleasant to have these conflicts around. And the more that you can understand how to deal with behaviours, then of course the better things are going to be in your particular work area. So the basics of conflict resolution behaviours are keeping open to things, openness. If you can demonstrate openness, then you are really going to proceed very, very well in resolving conflict. State your feelings and your thoughts very openly, directly, and honestly. These are competencies actually of the modern day manager. In past programs, I have mentioned this to my students, and to be open is a very valuable skill. When you are open, you definitely don't hide or disguise the real object of the disagreement. You don't actually hide anything about yourself at all. Being open is a very positive approach to resolving conflict. Use I statements. As we have done in the past segment, use I statements and talk about how you feel and what you want. Focus on the current things and problems and identifying ways of solving them. So being open about the feelings and the thoughts you have is essential and one of the most important behaviours you can exhibit when resolving conflict. Listen with empathy. This cannot be focused on enough. Trying to understand and feel what the other person is feeling and to see the situation from the other person's point of view. This is an exceptional skill to have, an exceptional quality that will really take you far forward into management and to being a very effective communicator. Demonstrate your understanding and validate the other person's feelings through being empathic. Comments such as, "I appreciate how you feel. I understand your feelings. I'm sorry I made you feel that way." These kinds of expressions let the other person know that you are sincere in understanding her views, for example. Communication is very important, isn't it? The way you use your words and the way you express yourself is really very valuable when trying to resolve conflict. Supportiveness, one of the 5 behaviours that you should exhibit and which will help you resolve conflict, is supportiveness. Expressing your concern for and support of the other person is really very encouraging to other people, and letting them know that you want to find a solution that benefits both of you. This supporting nature that you can demonstrate is really going to be very encouraging and rewarding for the other person. And stating your willingness to change your opinion if it's appropriate, if reasons are given that you are willing to change, is something that is very, very important to others. Being willing to support the other person's position, if it makes sense, is also going to win points from the other person for you. So show your supportiveness. Let them know that you are in there with them as well, and you are ready to work with them and help them every step of the way so that the conflict can be resolved. Being positive. Being positive is certainly a behaviour that you should demonstrate when it comes to looking at resolving conflict. Indeed, it's a behaviour, as all of these are, of a manager who wants to be effective in his role and who really wants to lead his team successfully. So, being positive, try to identify areas of agreement and emphasize those areas. Don't always dwell on the negatives. Dwell on the positives and the solutions that may come about. Look at the conflict as a way to a better understanding of the entire situation to find possible new solutions. So look at the conflict as a building a building thing, something that is constructive rather than destructive and negative. Look upon it as an opportunity, so to speak. Always be positive about the other person and your relationship with them. If you can demonstrate positive attitudes all the time and demonstrate the fact that you really want to work together with this other person in a positive way, then you are really communicating very well. And the chances are that the conflicts will be resolved in a very good way to promote harmony amongst everybody. With positiveness, express your commitment for finding resolution that works for everyone as well, not just one person. So positively consider all other people as well in the team. Your positiveness is going to transfer to the other people as well. When you have a positive approach and a positive attitude, it is more likely that that positive attitude does transfer to other people. In a way, it's contagious. And equality. This is a very important part of conflict resolution and the behavior that goes with resolving conflict. Treat the other person and his ideas and opinions as equal. Don't ever take on a superior air or a superior approach when you're trying to communicate in a conflict situation. Give the person time and space to completely express his ideas as well. Give him ample opportunity. Let there be a balance. You, of course, wish to have time to express your ideas and your opinions, so please go ahead and let the other person have equal time as well to talk to you, to give you their opinions and feelings. When we talk about equality, we also mean here to evaluate all ideas and positions logically, without regard to who gave those ideas and who has those positions. So that way you are being a little bit more open and you are being more balanced and fair and equal in the approach to the conflict. So we can say that these conflict resolution behaviors are really going to help you encounter any situation that you come across. Coming up to our conclusion of conflict resolution, we are now going to just take a brief look at the benefits that come with resolving conflict successfully. Conflict, as I said in the opening of this program, conflict comes to us every day in very many different shapes and forms, and we have to be ready for it. We can't run away from it. We need to confront it, and we need to collaborate with others to be able to reach solutions. So the benefits of conflict resolution are quite simple and quite straightforward, and no doubt you would know these already, but let's just run through them as we sum up our program. Healthy disagreement can have a positive generating effect, and this is true without a doubt. It's good to have disagreement. It's good to have discussion and argument and debate if it's healthy, and it can have a very constructive effect, meaning that the rewards can be quite immense if the disagreements promote a healthy debate. As people are forced to work through a problem to its solution, they also get a chance to better understand the points of view of others. So, in a way, conflict brings people together. It brings people together so they can go through things together, feel things together, and understand each other much better. In some ways, it is a chance to build bonds. We can look at it in that way as well. Successful resolution also of small conflicts that appear can diffuse the possibility of more serious conflicts coming along later on. So if you can stop conflict right there immediately as it begins, and when it is in a small stage, then quite obviously you are going to prevent major problems happening from in the later terms. So this is something to consider when you're looking at conflict. If you can explore problems collaboratively, working together with people, building better working relationships along the way, then this can also lead us to gain more information, new perceptions, new ideas about things. So we're actually finding out a lot more about things purely because of the conflict. The conflict has created us to look in new areas, so to speak, and to understand more things, rather not just the surface of things, but to determine key issues that are under the surface. So we do have some very important benefits that come with conflict resolution. As I said, we really don't like to welcome conflict. We don't like to say, hey, come on, conflict, come, I'm looking forward to seeing you. I want conflict every day in my life. No, we're not saying that. But what we are saying is that realistically, it does appear. It is there, and there are necessary ways that we have to look at resolving it. I do hope that in this program you have been able to pick up on some very basic guidelines to resolving conflict and to understand the importance of the communication process in conflict resolution. You cannot resolve conflict simply by telling people to stop. You cannot do that. It does require that you go through certain steps, follow certain strategies, and use certain communication skills to try to bring about positive outcomes, meaning positive solutions to conflict. I'm sure indeed that you have great experience in your role. If you are an experienced manager, that is fine, and I do hope that you have been able to add to your repertoire or to your toolkit of problem-solving techniques, of conflict-resolving techniques as well. Thank you once again for listening, and I do look forward to seeing you in some of our other sessions on communication skills as they come up in this program. Thank you and goodbye.